A German shepherd froze at the tree-line, his body tense, ears rigid, tail locked like a signal. Behind him, a man in uniform stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching as if the forest itself had tightened around his chest. The dog didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just stared, unblinking, at the silhouette of an old cabin half-eaten by moss and time. Officer Mark Rodas knew that look. Shadow had found something, and it wasn't good. Inside that cabin, beneath rafters that sagged like broken bones, stood something that didn't belong to this world. A coffin. Not aged. Not dusty. New. Too new. Sealed shut like a secret no one wanted told. Shadow limped forward, that old wound in his leg making his steps uneven, and stopped beside it. His body quivered, but not from fear. It was something else, something older than this moment. He remembered. This isn't just a story about a coffin in the woods. It's about a man who followed his dog into darkness. A dog who never forgot the scent of danger. And a truth someone tried to bury so deep it should have stayed there. It was just after 9 when the last ember of daylight vanished behind the ridge, leaving the pines standing like sentinels in the dusk. Rain drifted in thin sheets across the windshield as Mark guided his cruiser along the empty forest road. Pinebrook, Washington, where lights went out by 8 and secrets stayed locked behind curtains, was silent now. But the woods never slept. Mark was 38, carved from years of duty and loss. The army had built him. Law enforcement had hardened him. Both had stripped away the shine, leaving a man whose jaw was set like stone, whose asphalt-gray eyes never rested. He wasn't the kind who filled silence with words. Silence was all he had left after Sarah. He hadn't stepped inside a church since the day they lowered her into the ground. But sometimes, when fog clung to the trees like ghosts, he still said her name under his breath, like a prayer he didn't believe in anymore. The only soul riding with him tonight was Shadow, a German shepherd graying at the muzzle, 10 years old, carrying scars like badges. One ear hung limp from an old training injury. A bullet mark cut across his hind leg, a reminder of a raid that went wrong long ago. Shadow wasn't just a partner. He was the last living thread that tied Mark to the man he used to be. When the department wanted to retire him, Mark refused. The dog wasn't done. Neither was he. Rain softened to a whisper, pattering on the roof as Mark reached for his thermos. The coffee inside was as tired as he felt. That's when Shadow stirred in the back seat. His head lifted, ears perked. Then came the sound, the low growl that meant one thing: something was out there. Mark froze. His hand hovered over the dash. "What is it, boy?" Shadow whined once, then pressed his nose to the window, breath fogging the glass. Then, with sudden urgency, he barked sharp and pawed at the door. Mark pulled over. The cruiser's engine idled like a heartbeat against the quiet. Grabbing his flashlight, he opened the door. Shadow hit the ground before his boots did, nose sweeping the air in tight arcs. Mark followed him off the road, boots sinking into damp earth, the smell of pine thick in his lungs. They were deep in the northern stretch of Pinebrook National Forest, near old logging Route 9. Nobody lived out here. Nobody sane anyway. Shadow moved fast, a streak of muscle and purpose, tail rigid, head low. Mark trailed close, his hand brushing the grip of his sidearm. The deeper they went, the thicker the silence grew, like the forest was holding its breath. No trail, no sound but dripping leaves. After 5 long minutes, Shadow stopped dead. The cabin emerged like a scar in the wilderness. Wooden, skeletal, its porch slumped from decades of rain and neglect. Ivy crawled up the walls like veins, windows gaping hollow and black. Mark didn't remember this place. He knew these woods. This wasn't on any map. It shouldn't have been here. And yet, it waited. Shadow stood frozen, staring at the door. Mark's grip on the flashlight tightened as he stepped forward. His beams swept over warped boards and rotting shingles. No footprints. No tire tracks. No signs of life. But there was something off. Too still. Too preserved. The door yielded with a whisper when he pushed it open, exhaling a draft that smelled like rot and cold metal. Inside was darkness, thick, oppressive, swallowing every sound. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he stepped in. Shadow followed, tail low, hackles raised. Mark's light cut through the black, revealing nothing but emptiness, until it landed on the center of the room. A coffin. Black. Smooth. Untouched. Not a speck of dust. Not a single cobweb. Not a sign it had ever belonged in a place that time had chewed to bones. Mark's pulse spiked. He felt it before he thought it, wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The smell hit him next, a stench of chemicals, scorched metal, an antiseptic that didn't belong in any forest cabin. Shadow circled the coffin once, growling deep in his chest, then stopped and sniffed the floorboards beneath it. No debris. No decay. No spiders crawling in the dark. It was as if the thing had been placed there moments ago. Mark knelt, his hand trembling as he reached out and touched the side. It was cold. Too cold. Not like wood. Not like earth. Something else. Something that didn't belong under this roof or under any sky. Someone put you here, he whispered. His voice sounded strange in the silence. He stood and swept the beam across the walls, catching on a detail almost lost to peeling paint, numbers carved into the far beam. 6 digits. A date. June 18th, 03. June 18th, 2003. Mark didn't know what happened that day. But whoever scratched those numbers, they wanted someone to remember. Shadow barked then, sharp, urgent, claws raking the floor near a moss-covered beam in the corner. And in that moment, Mark knew they weren't alone. Mark shifted closer, flashlight cutting through the murk as his hand brushed something wedged between the floorboards. A corner of damp paper peeked through the slats. He pried it free, careful not to tear it, and unfolded it under the beam of his light. A child's drawing. Crayon scribbles on lined paper. A black box in the center, trees looming all around it, and at the bottom, a stick figure with a red X slashed over its eyes. A chill snaked down his spine. That wasn't a doodle. That was a message. A warning. He slipped it into an evidence pouch, eyes darting back to the coffin as rain hammered harder against the roof, drumming like distant footsteps. Something about this didn't add up. This place wasn't abandoned. It wasn't forgotten. It had been prepared. He didn't call it in. Not yet. Not until he knew what the hell he was standing in. The silence pressed in heavier, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin bones. Mark stepped closer to the coffin, his light tracing its glossy black surface. From a distance, it looked ceremonial, expensive even, but up close, the truth bled through. The welds weren't neat. They were jagged, ugly, molten scars running along the seams, bubbling at the edges as though someone in a panic sealed it shut with a handheld torch. Mark crouched, fingers gliding along the lid's edge. The metal was cold, biting through his gloves, and still carried the faint scent of scorched steel, layered with something bitter and chemical. Shadow pressed against his leg, tail rigid, hackles bristling in a wave down his back. A low growl rumbled deep in the dog's chest before it broke into sharp barks. His nose jammed toward the coffin's base, pawing at the floor with frantic urgency, claws raking deep grooves into the rotting boards. Mark leaned closer, his stomach knotting. The smell was stronger near the floor, chemical, synthetic, mingled with rust and something else that didn't belong in these woods. Something had seeped into the grain of the timber. Shadow wasn't just spooked. He was alerting. Years of crime scenes, narcotic searches, and cadaver drills had burned that instinct into him. The dog knew. Mark's hand slid to his radio. "Leia, you there?" Static cracked first, then her voice came tight and sharp. "Go ahead. I've got something out here." A coffin. Welded shut. Shadows reacting. "This isn't a funeral home job." A pause stretched, filled by the rain clawing the roof. Then Leia spoke, voice low. "Mark, there's more. Gabe, the kid from earlier, his parents just called in. He's gone. Didn't come home last night. The words hit like a gut punch. What? They said he was sketching the woods after school. Talking about going back to find the black box. They thought it was just kid stuff. He hasn't been seen since. Mark's jaw locked as his eyes flicked to Shadow, still circling the coffin, nose pressed hard to the floorboards. Call in a full unit. And Leia, bring a medic. His voice dipped, heavy with something darker. And gloves. A lot of gloves. Copy that. 15 minutes. Mark clicked off and swept the room with his light. That's when he saw it. A rucksack collapsed near the far wall, damp from a steady drip through the ceiling. He approached slowly, boot heels whispering across the boards. Inside, 3 dented soup cans, half a bottle of water, a roll of duct tape. Nearby, 2 gloves lay on the floor, dark blue work gloves. One inside out, as if ripped off in a hurry. Shadow moved to the same corner, and began pawing again, harder this time. Mark crouched, his flashlight carving shadows between the slats. Something pale peeked out, soaked and grimy. He fished it free with tweezers. A handkerchief, yellow once, now stained with filth and something worse. A faded cartoon dog stitched into the corner. And across one edge, blood. Dark. Rusted. Dried so long it flaked under the light. Damn it! The words fell flat in the heavy air. This wasn't drugs. It wasn't a ritual. It was worse. Someone had been living here. Someone brought food. Someone bled. Mark bagged the scrap and turned back toward the coffin. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the black monolith in the center of the rot and ruin. Why here? Why like this? Then he saw them, grooves etched into the floor in a wide circle around its base. Not scratches. Drag marks. The coffin had been moved. His heart thudded harder as he crouched low. The beams skimmed the welds along the lid, and there it was. A gap. Tiny. Almost invisible. Whoever sealed this thing hadn't finished the job. Shadow froze suddenly, his growl deepening to a low snarl. His gaze locked upward. Mark followed it, sweeping his beam across the rafters. The attic hatch gaped open above the beams, a jagged mouth in the ceiling. The dust up there had been disturbed recently. Mark couldn't see past the slats. He couldn't hear anything either. But Shadow didn't blink. The dog took one step forward and unleashed a single, piercing bark that cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Mark's weapon came up instinctively, his finger brushing the trigger guard as he angled toward the hatch. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. But the air felt alive. Watching. He backed toward the door slowly, signaling Shadow to heel. The shepherd obeyed, though his eyes never left the hole above. Rain hissed through the forest outside. Headlights flared in the distance, cutting through the dark like spears of fire. Mark stood in the doorway, the black coffin looming behind him, the weight of the woods pressing in from all sides. And for the first time in years, he felt fear sink its teeth into his bones. Rain hammered the roof like a war drum, and every groan of the cabin seemed to carry a warning. The chill crawling through Mark's veins wasn't from the storm or the night air, it came from that coffin, from whatever secret was locked inside its steel belly. Shadow crouched low, his body tense as a bowstring, eyes locked on the box with a quiet, animal knowing. Mark set the flashlight on the warped floorboards, the beams stretching upward, painting the coffin in a pale, trembling glow. He slid the flat end of his multi-tool into the seam. The weld groaned like a whisper dragged through teeth. Shadow growled low, ears flat. Mark froze, listening. The woods were holding their breath. Only the rain spoke. He pressed harder. The lid shifted, metal screaming faintly as it yielded. With one steady push, it cracked open. He exhaled slow, lifting the lid just enough to see inside. No body. No bones. No stench of rot. Just velvet, crimson, flawless, stretched tight like skin over something solid. Mark's breath clouded the beam of light as he touched it. The fabric was soft but resisted like there was muscle underneath. He peeled the edge back. Steel. A dull, gray plate fitted perfectly inside, hidden beneath the velvet lining. It wasn't a coffin. It was a container. A vault. His fingers traced scuff marks across the metal, faint but there, evidence of movement, something heavy dragged, something locked in. He tapped it with a knuckle. Hollow but dense. Whatever was inside, someone wanted it sealed. And hidden. Mark's pulse thudded in his ears as he switched on his body cam. The red light blinked to life while he narrated under his breath, every detail crisp and low, concealed compartment, industrial plate, no human remains. The beam of his light swept across the interior one last time, then crawled up the cabin wall, and stopped cold. Above the hearth, faint chalk lines crawled across the wood like a spider's web. 3 triangles intersecting in a circle. Beneath it, letters, sharp, angular, written in a language he didn't recognize. He stepped closer. The chalk was fresh. Not weathered. Not smudged by time. These marks had meaning. He'd seen something like this before, 2 years ago, in Spokane, scrawled inside a trailer filled with bodies and meth fumes. It was a code. A marker. Routes, contacts, drop zones. Back then, the case went nowhere, buried under layers of silence from people above his pay grade. Shadow's rumble broke through the thought like a blade. Mark turned. The dog was locked on the window, teeth bared just enough to glint. The broken frame gaped black, rain dripping through the splintered wood. Then, soft, deliberate, the crunch of leaves outside. Footsteps. Mark killed his light, sliding into the corner by the window. The forest moaned with wind and rain, but the steps were there, measured, unhurried, just beyond the wall. Shadow inched forward, lips curled, a low snarl vibrating his chest. Mark waited, heart thudding slow and heavy. The steps stopped. Nothing. Just the breath of the storm. Then, silence that felt too deep to trust. He kept his light off as he returned to the coffin, peeling the velvet back completely. His fingers found them, 2 recessed bolts in the plate. Fasteners locking something inside. He didn't open it. Not now. Not alone. He let the fabric fall back, lowering the lid without a sound. His beam swept the room low, catching on the hearth again. Ashes. He brushed the cold remnants with his glove, exposing scraps charred black, cloth melted into strings, fragments of synthetic blue. Plastic curled and warped, like a badge that had lost its face. He bagged a piece, eyes flicking to the clock on his watch. Almost 30 minutes gone. Too long. Time to call it in. The footsteps came back, faster now, fading into the trees like something fleeing the edge of his light. He didn't chase. Not yet. Mark keyed the radio, voice low but sharp. Dispatch, Unit 49. Immediate assistance at unlisted structure northeast of Route 9. Sending coordinates now. Possible trafficking markers, secured container, and individuals in proximity. Send backup. Full forensic. Copy 49. The words were still echoing when Shadow growled again, short, sharp, electric. His gaze pinned the window. Mark turned, scanning the dark with the slow dread of a man who already knows what he'll see. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Just the trees, slick with rain, and the hollow weight of something watching from beyond the glass. The wind shifted. He felt it in his spine before he heard it, the whisper of underbrush bending under weight close circling. Mark's finger brushed the safety on his sidearm. And for the first time in years, his gut told him the truth. Whatever was out there wasn't running away. It was waiting. It wasn't the whisper of wind in the trees or the nervous twitch of a deer startled by light. This sound had weight. Slow. Deliberate. Each step pressed into the earth like it owned the night. Mark killed the flashlight, forcing his breath to steady, and froze. Shadow was already crouched at the shattered window, body rigid, ears cutting the dark like radar. The growl started low, deep in his chest, a sound that promised violence. Mark edged toward the door, hand brushing his holster, instincts sharp. This wasn't random. He'd walked into an ambush before, this felt the same. Then came the crack of a branch. Heavy. Close. And another. Not one set of feet. More. Moving through the fog with purpose, no rush, no attempt at silence anymore. He barely had time to issue the command when something shifted between the trees. A shape swallowed in mist. Then another. And another. 3 silhouettes sliding through the black like predators. One of them glinted, a streak of steel catching a sliver of body cam light before vanishing again. Mark backed toward the coffin, drawing slow, smooth. His voice cut the air like a wire pulled tight. Shadow. Guard. The dog lowered further, trembling with raw tension, growl ripping louder now. That's when the world fractured. The door exploded inward. A figure lunged, tall, hood up, face shrouded in black. Metal flashed as the steel pipe arced down. Shadow hit him like a bullet. Flesh and fabric tore as teeth locked deep into his forearm. The scream tore through the cabin, raw and animal. The pipe clanged to the floor, spinning like a loose gear. The attacker slammed into the wall, clawing at the dog locked on his arm. Mark's weapon was out, his voice a sharp crack. Police! Down! Movement at the doorway, second silhouette, smaller, pistol raised. Mark fired once, center mass, low. The man crumpled with a grunt, rolling backward into mud, the gun slipping from his grip and vanishing in the dark. The third never came through the door. A flicker by the back wall, then a flash of muzzle. The hiss of a round splitting air. Mark dropped, feeling the bullet punch through timber where his skull had been a heartbeat ago. He rolled hard, shoulders screaming as he squeezed off a shot through the shattered glass. Back off! His shout ripped through the rain and thunder in his chest. Then silence. Thick, absolute. Followed by retreat. Boots tearing through wet leaves, fast now, fading into the black. The man shadow-mauled stumbled out, clutching his bleeding arm, leaving smears of red on wood and bark. Mark rose slow, gun still drawn, every nerve stretched like wire. He waited for the regroup. It didn't come. The forest swallowed them. He approached the window, breath held, scanning for a glint, a shift, a flicker of motion. Nothing but mist curling through skeletal trees. Nothing but the wind trying to sound innocent. His thumb hit the radio. Voice calm, clipped. Dispatch, Rhodes. Shots fired. 3 suspects, masks armed. Cabin at 22F. They're heading west on foot. Officer safe. Request backup now. Static chewed the seconds before the reply came sharp. Copy 49. Quinn inbound. 4 minutes. Medics trailing. Mark exhaled, slow and measured. The storm outside wasn't the worst thing in the night anymore. He turned, sweeping the cabin with his beam, and froze. The coffin lid had shifted. Just slightly. A hairline gap whispering a secret. He approached, peeling back the velvet lining he'd hidden before. His fingers found the slot at the head, barely big enough for what rested there. A black rectangle. Plastic. Waterproof. Cold as river stone. No label. No markings. Just a shallow dent on its side, like it had been forced in with shaking hands. A USB drive. It felt heavier than it should as he slipped it into his vest. That's when headlights carved through the trees, clean and white against the storm's gray. Tires crushed gravel like bones under weight. A sheriff's unit. Leah Quinn stepped out, weapon low, silhouette cutting through the rain like a blade. 32. Lean. Strong lines. Hair close-cropped, eyes sharp enough to cut lies. She didn't shout. She never needed to. Mark, you hit? He shook his head once. Negative. 3 men. 1 armed. Shadow disabled one, but they broke off. Her gaze slid past him, landing on the box in the center of the room. Her jaw flexed. That what I think it is? Depends on what you think it is, he said, voice dark. But it's no coffin. Shadow limped to her side, licking at a shallow gash. She crouched, hands soft on his head. He's fine. Vet'll meet us at the station. Then those eyes locked back on him. Talk to me, Mark. What the hell is this? He held up the drive between two fingers. Black. Silent. Dangerous. I don't know yet, he said. But someone didn't want us to find it. Back at Cedar Hollow, the overhead lights hummed like bees, throwing pale halos across steel and paper. The USB lay between them on the evidence table, small and innocent as a trigger. Mark slotted it into the secure laptop. The screen pulsed once, then bled into a folder. Truth_45. Inside, columns of names and numbers ticked down the page like gravestones. But it wasn't the spreadsheets that stole their breath, it was the last file. A map. Cedarwood National Forest sprawled across the screen, veins of rivers and shadowed ridges. Red symbols bled over it, scattered like wounds, arrows, circles, crude excess carved by a trembling hand. One of them pulsed less than a mile from the cabin. Leia leaned in, her voice a low blade. Mark, what the hell were they burying out there? The room was warm, but Gabe still shivered, his small frame swallowed by the blanket. His eyes, wide and distant, kept darting toward the door like he expected someone to come through it. Melanie leaned in slightly, her voice soft, steady, the kind that could coax truth out of silence. You're safe now, Gabe. Nobody's going to hurt you here. He nodded slowly, but his hands gripped the cocoa like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Mark stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching every flicker in the boy's expression. Something about the way Gabe's eyes moved, cautious, calculating, told him this kid had seen more than he was ready to say. Dean approached quietly, his coat whispering against his legs. He talk yet? Mark shook his head. Just the name of the dog. Shadow's the only one he trusts. Shadow was lying near Gabe's chair, head resting on his paws, eyes never leaving the boy. The dog had that sense, the one that always seemed half-human. Melanie slid a sketchpad closer. Gabe, she said gently, can you draw for me? Anything you remember. A place, a person, something you saw. The boy hesitated, then reached for the pencil with trembling fingers. The sound of graphite scratching against paper filled the quiet. Mark stepped closer to see. At first it was just lines, jagged, uneven. Then shapes began to take form. Trees, a long rectangular box, and three figures, faceless but distinct. One of them holding something long in his hand. Dean's jaw tightened as he leaned in. That's them. Mark's stomach sank. He knew it before Dean said a word. Whoever these men were, they weren't just smugglers. This was bigger, more organized, and far more dangerous. He looked at Dean. You still think this is just cartel movement? Dean didn't answer right away. He just stared at the drawing, then at the boy. No, he said finally, his voice low. This is something else. Before Mark could respond, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered, keeping his voice level. Rhodes. Static cracked through the line, then a voice, male, calm, too calm. You have something that belongs to us. Mark froze. His eyes flicked to Dean, who instantly read his expression. The voice continued, slow and deliberate. Bring it to the Red Pine clearing. Noon. Alone. Or the boy doesn't stay safe for long. The call cut before Mark could speak. He stared at the screen, heart pounding. They knew. About the USB. About Gabe. About everything. Dean was already moving. Trace? Dead end, Mark muttered, sliding the phone into his pocket. Leia stepped into the room, her face pale when she saw Mark's expression. What happened? Mark didn't sugarcoat it. They called. They want to trade. Dean's eyes narrowed. They're testing you. Noon gives us less than 3 hours. Mark's gaze dropped to Shadow, who had lifted his head, ears pricked like he understood every word. Then we make them believe I'm coming alone, Mark said quietly. Outside, the fog hadn't lifted, and the forest stood like an endless wall of shadows. Somewhere out there, men with masks and guns were waiting, and Mark could feel the weight of the USB in his pocket like a brand. This wasn't just about drugs. This wasn't just about money. Whatever they were hiding in those drop points was big enough to kill for, and now, big enough to take a child. And in that cold silence before the storm, with Shadow at his side and the clock ticking down, Mark knew one thing: noon wasn't going to end the way they thought. Fear has a way of creeping in silently, like the breath of the forest before a storm. Gabe sat there, small and trembling, but when he lifted his eyes, there was a strange steadiness in them. He whispered about a badge, said it gleamed too much, like it didn't belong, and that the man smelled like paint. Melanie crouched beside him, her voice soft, holding out paper and crayons. "Can you show me?" she asked. And without a word, Gabe began to draw, each stroke deliberate, too sure for a child his age. Mark stood behind the glass, watching. His chest tightened with every line Gabe laid down. No child should know how to do this. But this one did. Outside, the air crackled with urgency. Agents moved like shadows as they prepared for what was coming. A coffin had been built overnight, an exact replica of the original. It wasn't meant to hold secrets this time. It was bait, fitted with a hidden camera and a tracker, waiting to catch the hand that had been pulling the strings. Dean and Leia surveyed the cabin's site, calm yet wired for danger. "We make them think we missed the drop," Dean murmured. "They'll come back for it." Mark nodded, but his attention was pulled by the dog at his side. Shadow, nose low, tail stiff, moved toward a tree. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not alarm, something deeper. Mark followed his gaze. A man in tactical gear stood near one of the base tents, clipboard in hand. Everything about him looked right yet wrong. Shadow crept forward, stopping just shy of 5 feet. He sniffed, whined, and then his bark shattered the silence. 1, 2. Heads turned. The man froze. Mark strode closer. "You with Pinebrook or Bureau?" The smile came too fast, too shallow. Bureau. Logistics." Dean's eyes narrowed. "Name?" The pause was a beat too long. "Porter. Dan Porter." Dean's jaw tightened. "We don't have a Dan Porter." And then it broke. The man spun and bolted, crashing through the trees. Shadow launched forward like a bullet, Mark's shout chasing him through the woods. The shepherd didn't need orders. Paws tore through roots and moss, old scars forgotten in the heat of the hunt. The imposter ran hard, but Shadow was harder. Within seconds, jaws locked on his ankle, dragging him down. The screams split the night as he fought, but Shadow held on, unyielding until Mark and the others closed in. Cuffs clicked. Breathless, Dean stared down at the man. "Guess we found our leak." His name was Samuel Griggs. Once a cop, now a ghost of dishonor, rotting in the underbelly of the same system he'd sworn to serve. A scarred history of falsified evidence, 5 years gone, and here he was again, back with a purpose. Back to poison everything. At the station, Gabe slid his drawing across the table. A face stared back, a cruel smile, eyes like pits, and across the cheekbone, a jagged scar. Melanie's stomach turned as the sketch met old records. It matched. It was him. Mark stepped into the room as Shadow curled at Gabe's feet, watchful, steady, loyal. "We've got confirmation," Bean said flatly. "The network has a man inside Pinebrook. They know we're close." Mark exhaled, his pulse drumming against his ribs. "Then we finish it before someone else disappears." Outside, the woods lay cloaked in silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Mark crouched behind a fallen log, gun in hand, eyes locked on the weathered cabin just 20 feet away. The replica coffin sat under a broken slice of moonlight, heavy and black, as if daring someone to claim it. Leia was to his left, poised behind a mossy boulder, her rifle steady, her jaw set. She was steel-wrapped in quiet grace, every nerve tuned to the danger crawling closer. Behind them, Dean and his team tracked the drone feed, screens glowing like restless eyes in the dark. Shadow pressed low against the earth, a dark streak of muscle and instinct, his breath ghosting in the cold air. Hours earlier, they'd found the truth in a farmhouse cellar. The real coffin wasn't velvet-lined, it was a vault of sin, foam compartments littered with the stench of narcotics, residue that told stories of lives broken for profit. And that wasn't all. Shadow's paws had unearthed more: a blood-soaked shirt, bundles of cash, phones that held secrets in silence. Evidence buried like bodies. Now, under the watch of stars, it all came down to this. A rustle, faint but sharp as a blade, sliced through the night. Mark didn't move, didn't even blink. Dean's tracker flared red. Twice. Confirmation. They were coming. 4 figures emerged from the dark, gliding through the trees like phantoms. Not kids. Not wanderers. Predators in black gear, moving with precision. Eyes sweeping. Hands tight. One of them carried a long canvas bag. And Mark knew, without a doubt, the night was about to bleed. A crowbar glinted under the pale moonlight as one of them tightened his grip. Another man adjusted the strap of the canvas bag. Shadow's growl rolled low and deep, vibrating through the ground until Mark could feel it in his bones. The figures moved with precision, cutting through the night like predators that had claimed the dark as their own. At the cabin door, one man tested the handle. It creaked open without resistance. Unlocked. The 4 slipped inside, silent as ghosts. Leia's voice crackled softly in Mark's earpiece. Visual confirmation. Standing by. Dean's order followed like a breath of steel. Hold until they touch the coffin. We need them red-handed. Then came another shadow, a figure drifting in behind the 4, hood low, face obscured, yet something about the gait cut through Mark like ice. The slouched shoulders. The nervous scan of the tree line. He knew that walk. Sheriff Harold Boyd. Once Pinebrook's guardian, now the face behind its darkest secrets. Rumors had trailed him like smoke: tampered evidence, missing inmates, land grabs no one could explain. No proof. Until now. Mark's jaw locked. Leia's sharp eyes caught it too. Her glance was quick, but her hand never wavered on the trigger. Hold! Dean's voice snapped through the airwaves. Wait for the lift. Inside the cabin, the man with the crowbar wedged it under the coffin lid. The wood groaned. Mark's breath slowed, heartbeat sinking with the moment. The lid lifted. Go! The forest exploded. Flash bangs ripped the dark apart in bursts of white fire. Sirens screamed. Boots thundered. Chaos swallowed the night whole. One suspect darted for the trees, but Shadow was faster, springing from the undergrowth like vengeance itself. He hit the man hard, dragging him down with a force that left no room for mercy. The scream that followed was brief. Leia was there in seconds, steel cuffs clicking into place as Shadow held his prey to the dirt. Inside, another suspect swung wild at an agent, baton slicing the air, but Mark slammed into him from behind. The man hit the wall, the crowbar clattering to the floor as breath tore from his lungs. And then Boyd. The sheriff who had worn his badge like armor now slipped for the back door, moving like a rat desperate for the dark. Dean was waiting, gun raised, voice like a hammer. Hands up, Sheriff! Boyd froze. Slowly he turned, eyes flashing with something bitter. Dean! Save it! Dean cut in, stepping closer, the night sharp between them. You built this whole thing under your badge. The weight of the truth settled heavy in the cold air as agents dragged the last man out. Mark crouched beside Shadow, mud streaked across the shepherd's sable coat. He smoothed a hand over the bent ear. Good boy, he murmured. And just like that, it was over, in 5 brutal minutes. But the storm that followed would last far longer. Back at the station, evidence piled like bricks in a wall of betrayal. Files torn from Boyd's home. Maps, smuggling routes, names of officers who had sold their souls for silence. Under floorboards, a hard drive that bled secrets worse than the USB ever had. In the interrogation room, Boyd sat hollowed, his arrogance crumbling into ash. You think this town ever cared about justice? His voice was cracked, but the venom still dripped. I gave people what they wanted. Peace. Order. I just took a cut. That's how it works. Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. The night had already spoken. The Pines had kept their promise. It wasn't drones or tech that broke this case. It was instinct. It was a dog with one bent ear and eyes that didn't know how to look away. Morning came slow to Pinebrook, bleeding light across the treetops like a whispered confession. Golden shafts pierced the mist, touching a town that could no longer hide its rot. The sting had ended 5 days ago, but its echoes rolled through every porch, every hushed conversation. News vans circled the precinct like vultures. Corruption, betrayal, redemption, the headlines wrote themselves. And in the middle of the lobby, stretched across a hand-stitched rug of deep forest green, lay Shadow. The center was embroidered with a silver paw and a badge number, 07-12. His eyes were closed, but one ear twitched at the sound of boots he knew better than any voice. Mark stepped inside, coffee in hand, uniform sharp but weariness etched in every line of his face. He knelt, fingers finding that familiar curve behind Shadow's ear. "Morning, hero," he whispered. The station had changed. The air smelled different, brighter somehow. A new sheriff would be named soon. For now, Leia carried the weight with quiet grace. Corruption had been carved out like rot from a fallen tree. The scars would remain, but scars are proof of survival. In the break room, Leia sat flipping through a leather-bound folder, the title etched in gold. Through the Pines, a deputy's journal. Her posture, usually taut with duty, softened when she looked up at Mark. "That the start of your memoir?" he teased lightly. "Yours, actually," she said, sliding the folder his way. "I just organized your reports. Dean thinks the Bureau might add it to their archives." Mark chuckled, settling into the chair. "People really want to read about a dog who stole my spotlight?" Her smile was rare, but real. "That dog saved all of us." Outside, an old green SUV pulled into the lot. Lisa Donnelly stepped out, small and worn by years of hard roads. Beside her, Gabe clutched her hand, eyes wide, voice still shy from silence. But when he saw the shepherd through the glass, something broke loose inside him. He ran. The boy's laughter, a sound too long missing, spilled into the air as he threw himself into Shadow's fur. The dog rose to meet him, tail wagging slow, a rumble of recognition in his chest. "I told Mom he was magic," Gabe whispered against Shadow's coat. Lisa knelt, tears trembling in her lashes. "Thank you," she said to Mark, her voice breaking. "He didn't speak for 2 days, not until he saw that dog's picture in the paper." Mark's throat tightened. He crouched low, his voice steady but soft. "He's safe now. That's all that matters." Later, when the sun slid west and painted the square in amber, the town gathered. No ceremony of grandeur, no brass bands or speeches spun for show, just faces weathered by truth, standing shoulder to shoulder in quiet reverence. On the wooden steps of City Hall, the mayor held a small box wrapped in ribbon. The flag rippled against the sky washed in soft gold as the mayor stepped forward, his voice steady, carrying across the crowd gathered at the square. "We are here to honor those who stood against the shadows that crept into our home," he said. Faces watched in silence, families clutching one another, children perched on shoulders, officers lined like sentinels of a town reborn. "To Deputy Leia Ross, to Officer Mark Steele, to the FBI team." His eyes softened as they found the shepherd waiting at the base of the steps. "And to one very good boy." Laughter rose gentle and warm, breaking the chill of the evening air. Shadow was called forward. Mark led him up the wooden steps, the boards creaking beneath boots and paws. The mayor knelt, lifting the lid of a small velvet box. Inside gleamed a silver-plated metal shaped like a shield, its edges etched with 3 words: valor, loyalty, service. The applause came like a tide, swelling as the mayor clipped the metal to Shadow's collar. For a moment, the old shepherd just blinked, and then, with the ease of a soul who understood everything without words, he leaned in and kissed the mayor's cheek. Laughter broke again, louder this time, mingled with tears that shimmered in more than a few eyes. Mark stood back and let it wash over him, the faces, the smiles, the weight of darkness finally broken. For the first time in years, he felt something settle deep inside his chest. Not the brittle calm bought by silence, but the kind of peace that only comes after truth burns everything false to ash. That night, long after the last cheer faded and the square lay empty under the watch of stars, Mark drove north of town. The road curled through the hills, deeper into the wilderness where cabins clung to the slopes like secrets carved in wood. One of them was his now, a gift from an uncle long gone. Weathered porch, crooked steps, a chimney that whispered smoke into the cold air. Shadow leapt from the truck, paws sinking into the earth, and limped up those steps as if they'd always belonged to him. Inside, the space smelled of pine and stone. Mark laid a bedroll near the hearth for himself and a thick mat for Shadow, the glow of fire spilling across worn floorboards. On the mantel, he placed the metal in its box, the silver catching the flames like a promise. Later, cocoa warming his hands, Mark sat on the porch with the shepherd stretched at his feet. The forest breathed around them, wind combing through needles, stars winking awake one by one. "They wanted you in the city," Mark murmured, his fingers brushing over Shadow's fur. "Fancy kennels, other K9s, a soft retirement." Shadow lifted his head, eyes like molten amber, and huffed softly as if to say what words could never hold. Then he rested his head against Mark's boot. Mark smiled, something deep and quiet filling the cracks life had left behind. "Yeah," he whispered. "I thought so." Behind them, the cabin glowed warm, its windows spilling golden light onto the porch like a beacon. Out here, it wasn't about the badge or the headlines. It was about two old souls scarred but unbroken, finding peace in the hymn of the forest and the hush of stars telling stories older than time. The pines had hidden secrets long enough. Tonight they carried light. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or fanfare. They come on four legs, with a bent ear and a heart that beats for you. Guardians placed in our path not by chance, but by grace, to protect, to heal, to love without asking for anything in return. Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was proof that goodness still walks this earth in silence, that God sends help when hope feels like a dying ember. In a world where darkness hides behind familiar faces, may we never miss the quiet heroes among us, the ones who fight not for glory, but because love is in their bones. Be like Mark and Shadow. Stand for what's right. Protect the innocent. And let light break through the pines of your own life. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still believes in hope. And if you believe God still works miracles through His people, through His creatures, hold on to that faith like the lifeline it is. Because sometimes salvation doesn't roar. Sometimes it walks on padded paws and stays by your side, no matter how dark the woods become.